It is very seldom that ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer, a colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. Still, I would proudly declare that there is something strange about it. Why else should it be let so cheaply? And why has it stood so long without tenants? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical in the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and scoffs openly at any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I am sick, and what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there's nothing really the matter with one but slight nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, then what is one to do? So I take phosphates or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics and air and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again. Personally, I disagree with his ideas. Personally, I think work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? What is one to do? I did write for a while, in spite of him. But it did exhaust me a good deal having to be so sly about it. So I will let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place, 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English places that you read about, for it has hedges and walls and gates that lock. There is the most delicious garden. I never saw such a garden, large and shady, with box-bordered paths and long grape-covered arbors with seats under them. There was some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and co-heirs. Anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness, I'm afraid. But I don't care. There is something strange about the house. I can feel it. I even said so to John one night. He said what I felt was draught and shut the window. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I'm sure it is due to this nervous condition. So I take pains to control myself, before him at least. And that makes me very tired. John is very caring and loving. He hardly lets me stir without special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour of the day, and he takes charge of all care of me. So I feel basely ungrateful not to value it more. He said we came here solely on my account, that I was to have absolute rest and all the air I could get. And so we took to the nursery at the top of the house. It was a nursery first, and then playground and gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows are barred. For little children. The paint and paper look as if a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off, the paper. I never saw such a worse paper in all my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. It is only nervousness. Still, it does weigh on me not to do my duty in any way. I meant to be such a help to John, such a great comfort. And here I am, a burden already. Nobody would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able. It is fortunate Jenny is so good with the baby. Such a dear baby. And yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous.
True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been, and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain. But once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old woman. She had never wronged me. She had never offered me insult. For her gold, I had no desire. I think it was her eye. Yes, it was this. She had a vulture eye, a pale blue with a film over it, and whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old woman, and thus rid myself of the eye forever.
We have been here 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing since that first day. I'm sitting by the window now, up in this atrocious nursery, and there is nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save for lack of strength. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I am glad my case is not serious. Still, these troubles are dreadfully depressing. I'm getting dreadfully fretful. I suppose John was never nervous in his life. He laughs at me so about this wallpaper. At first he meant to repaper the room, but afterwards he said I was letting it get the better of me, and that there was nothing worse for a nervous patient than to give way to such fantasies. He said that after the paper was changed, then it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then that gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. And then he took me in his arms and called me a blessed little goose. He's right enough about the beds and windows and things. I'm getting quite fond of the room. Oh, except that horrid wallpaper. Out of one window I can see the garden. Those mysterious, deep-shaded arbors, the old-fashioned flowers and bushes and gnarly trees. I always fancy I see people walking in these paths and arbors. But John has cautioned me that I shouldn't give way to fancy in the least. He says that with my imagination, a nervous weakness like mine could lead to all manner of trouble, and that I should use my will and good sense to check the tendency. And so I try. But I find I get pretty tired when I try. I wish I could get well faster. But I must not think about that. This paper looks to me as if it knew what a vicious influence it had. There comes John, and I must put this away. He hates to have me write a word.
Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Mad men know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old woman than during the week before I killed her. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch on her door and opened it gently, very gently. And when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a lantern, closed, so that no light shone forth. And then I thrust in my head. You would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved slowly, very, very slowly. It took an hour to place my entire head within the room so far that I could see the woman where she lay upon the bed. Would a madman have been so wise as to do this? And when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, very cautiously, just so that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old woman who vexed me, but her evil eye. And every morning, when day broke, I went boldly into her chamber and spoke courageously to her, calling out her name in a hearty tone and inquiring how she had passed the night. So, you see, she would have been a very profound old woman indeed, to to have suspected that every night, just at midnight, I looked in upon her while she slept.
I'm getting quite fond of the room, in spite of the wallpaper. Perhaps because of the wallpaper. It dwells in my mind so. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd unblinking eyes are everywhere. There's one place where the two breadths didn't match, and the eyes go all up and down the line, one a little higher than the other. I never saw such expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. I lie on this great bed and follow that pattern about by the hour. I start, we'll say, at the bottom, down there in the corner, where the paper hasn't been touched, and I determine for the 1,000th time that I will follow that pattern to some sort of conclusion. I know a little of the principle of design, and this thing was not arranged by any laws of art or taste that I ever saw. The wallpaper has a kind of dim sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it when the sun is just so. I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to sulk about behind that silly and conspicuous front design. It makes me tired to watch it. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. And I know John would think it absurd. But I must think and say how I feel in some way. It is such a relief. But the effort is getting to be greater than the relief.
Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers. I could scarcely contain the feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. And perhaps I did, for she moved in the bed suddenly as if startled. Now, you might think I drew back, but no. Her room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close-fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew she could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on, steadily. I had my head all the way in, and was about to open the lantern, when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old woman sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?"
I didn't realize for the longest time what that thing was behind the pattern, that dim sub-pattern, but now I am quite sure it is a woman. By daytime, she is quiet, subdued. I fancy it is the pattern that keeps her so still. It is so puzzling. I lie down ever so much now. John says it is a good habit for me to sleep all I can. But I am convinced it is a very bad habit, for, you see, I don't sleep, and that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell them I'm awake. Oh, no. The fact is, I'm getting a little afraid of John.
I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear her lie down. She was still sitting up in bed, listening, just as I had done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. No, it was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew that sound well. Night after night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well.
John says if I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to Ware Mitchell in the fall. But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she says he is just like John, only more so. Besides, it's such an undertaking to go so far. I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing, and I cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when John is here or anybody else, but when I am alone, and I am alone a good deal just now. There is one comfort. The baby is well and happy and does not have to occupy this room with the horrid wallpaper. If we had not used it, that blessed child would have. What a fortunate escape. Why, I wouldn't have a child of mine, an impressionable little thing, live in such a room for anything. If we had not used it, that blessed child would have. I never thought of it before, but it is lucky that John kept me here after all. I can stand it so much easier than a baby, you see. There are things in that wallpaper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Behind that outside pattern, the dim shape gets clearer every day. It is a woman stooping down and creeping about behind the pattern. I don't like it a bit. I wonder. I begin to think. I wish John would take me away from here.
I knew what the old woman felt, and pitied her, although I chuckled at heart. I knew she had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when she had turned in the bed. Her fears had been ever since growing upon her. She had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. She said to herself, "It is just the wind in the chimney," or "It is a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, she had been trying to comfort herself with these suppositions, but had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, in approaching her, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused her to feel, although she neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room.
John says I mustn't lose my strength, and has me take cod liver oil and tonics and things. Dear John, he loves me so, and hates to have me sick. It's getting to be a great effort to think straight. Just this nervous weakness, I suppose. The same weakness that caused me to collapse on all fours on the way to dinner. John gathered me up in his arms and just carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed and sat by me and read to me till my head hurt. He said I am his darling and his comfort and all he had, and that I must use my will and self-control and not let any silly fancies run away with me. There comes Jenny. Such a dear girl as she is, and so careful of me and of the baby. I must not let her find me writing.
When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing her lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like a thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I could see it with perfect clarity. It was a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old woman's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot.
John seems very queer sometimes. And even Jenny has an inexplicable look. It strikes me occasionally, just as a scientific hypothesis, that perhaps it is the paper. I have watched John when he did not know I was looking, and come into the room on the most innocent of excuses. And I have seen him looking at that paper. And Jenny too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room. And when I said to her, in a quiet, a very quiet voice what she was doing with the paper. She turned around as if she'd been caught stealing, and looked quite angry, and asked me why I should frighten her so. Did that not sound innocent? Still, I know she was studying that pattern, and I am determined that nobody shall find out its secret but myself.
And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but an over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old woman's heart. It increased my fury like a beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tested how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder, I say. The old woman's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder every moment. Do you mock me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am.
It is so hard to talk to John about my case, because he is so wise and he loves me so. But I tried it last night. John was asleep, and I hated to wake him, so I got up softly and went to see and feel if that pattern really did move. And when I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he said. "Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I asked him if he would take me away from here. "Bless her heart," said he with a big hug. "She shall be as sick as she pleases. But really, dear, it's only 3 more weeks until our lease is up, and then we will take a nice little trip of a few days while Jenny is getting the house ready. Really, dear, you are better." "Better in body, perhaps," I began, and stopped short. For John sat up straight and looked at me with such a stern and reproachful look that I could not say another word. "My darling," said he, "for my sake and for our child's sake, as well as for your own, you should never for one instant let that idea enter into your mind. There is nothing so dangerous to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so?" So I didn't say another word, and we went to sleep. He thought I was asleep first, but I wasn't. I lay there for hours, trying to figure out if that front pattern and the back pattern really did move together or separately. And I saw the faint figure as she appeared to pull back the pattern, as if she wanted to get out.
And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes more I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. I thought the woman's heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old woman's hour had come. With a yell, I threw open the lantern and leapt into the room. She shrieked once. Once only. In an instant, I dragged her to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over her. I smiled to see the deed done. But for many minutes the heart beat on, with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the walls. At length it ceased. The old woman was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, she was stone dead. I placed my hand upon her heart for many minutes. There was no pulsation. She was stone dead. Her eye would bother me no more.
Life is so much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to look forward to, something to expect. John is so pleased to see me improve. He even laughed a little the other day and said I seemed to be flourishing in spite of my wallpaper. I had no intention of telling him that it was because of the wallpaper. He would laugh at me. He might even want to take me away. I don't want to leave now. Not until I have found it out. There is 1 week more, and I think that will be enough. I am feeling so much better now. I don't even sleep a wink anymore. For it is so interesting to watch developments.
If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all within the scantlings. I then replaced the 3 boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even hers, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the front door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I to fear? There entered 3 gentlemen who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. A report had been lodged at the police office. and they had been dispatched to search the premises.
I really have discovered something at last. Through watching so much at night when it changes so, I have finally found out. That paper does move. And no wonder. The woman behind shakes it. Sometimes I think there are a great many women, and sometimes only one. And she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. And all the time she is trying to climb through. I think that woman gets out in the daytime. And I'll tell you why. Privately. I have seen her. It is the same woman, for she is always creeping. And most women do not creep by daylight. I see her under the long shaded lane, creeping along. I see her under the dark arbors, creeping all around the garden. I see her on the long road under the trees, creeping along. And when someone comes, she hides under the blackberry vines. I don't blame her a bit. It must be very humiliating to be caught creeping during the daytime. If only that pattern could be gotten off from the under one. I mean to try it little by little. I have found out another funny thing that I shan't tell it this time. It does not do to trust people too much. There are only a few more days, and I think John is beginning to notice. He has a strange look in his eyes. He asked me all sorts of questions and pretended to be very loving and kind, as if I couldn't see through him. The paper only truly speaks to me. That I'm sure that John and Jenny are secretly affected by it. That I am here, and no person touches that paper but me, not alive.
I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old woman I mentioned was away in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to her chamber. I showed them her treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and invited them here to rest from their fatigue, while I, myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which laid the corpse of the victim.
Hurrah! It is the last evening, and our things have been packed, and John is to stay overnight in town and won't be back until the afternoon. Jenny wanted to sleep with me, but I told her I should undoubtedly rest for a night all alone. That was clever, for I wasn't alone a bit. As soon as it was night, and that poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern, I got up and ran to help. I pulled, and she shook, and she shook,
and I pulled, and before morning we had peeled off yards of that paper. And when the sun came up, that awful pattern began to laugh at me, and I determined that I would finish it today. Jenny looked at the walls in amazement, but I told her I did it out of pure spite of the vicious thing. Jenny laughed and said she wouldn't mind doing it herself. Oh, how she betrayed herself that time. She tried to get me out of the room. It was too obvious. But I told her that it was so quiet and empty and clean now that I would rest a while. And now she is gone. And the servants are gone. And the things are gone. And the baby is gone. And all that's left is that awful paper. I rather like the room now it is bare again.
The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they spoke of familiar things. But ere long I wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat, and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained strength until, at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. But I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath. Yet the officers heard nothing.
I must get to work. I have locked the door and thrown the key down into the front path. I don't want to go out, and I don't want to have anyone come in till John comes. I want to astonish him.
I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise continually increased. I arose and argued about trifles with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. I paced to and fro with heavy strides, as if though excited to fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh, God, what could I do? I foamed, I swore, I raved, I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It got louder, louder, louder. And still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected.
suspected. They knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. Anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And again, louder, 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 louder. Villains! Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here! Here! It is the beating of the hideous heart!
I don't like to look out of the window anymore. There are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all come out of the wallpaper as I did. It is so pleasant to be out in this great room and creep around as I please. I won't go outside, not even if Jenny asks me to. For outside you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. Why, there's John at the door. It's no use, young man, you can't open it. How he does call and pound. Now he's crying for an axe. Such a shame, breaking down that beautiful door. What is the matter? He cried. For God's sake, what are you doing?
I've got out at last, in spite of you and Jenny. And I've pulled off most of that paper so you can't put me back. Now why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I have to creep over him every time.